Was that mine or yours?
Okay, so it's recording there. Recording here. All right. Yeah, I use Audacity as my audio recording thing. All right, so I guess just to give everybody a little bit of background on this one, we're in the counseling program together. You come from a substance abuse counseling background, is that right?
Actually, I work in substance and behavioral health, but I'm pursuing a clinical mental health counseling. I'm not doing the addiction path.
Okay. And so what kind of got you into the behavioral health and substance abuse thing? Like what got you into this area?
I would say, growing up in undergrad, I went to college in 1996 in Central Illinois. I'm from Bourbonnais, Illinois, and I went to school in Champaign, Illinois. And then I've always gravitated towards psychology. Mm-hmm. And I started off with criminal justice and psychology minor. And I come from, a family of on my father's side, judges, lawyers, intellects in that realm. And on my mother's side, it was different. It was very much different. It was more poverty stricken and blue collar workers. But I always had this gravitation towards, helping people and just feeling in tune with others. So, and understanding human behavior in general. I was in love with studying serial killers, what in their brain makes them change, and why is there such a deviance in behavior? And so that felt my passion for psychology and the cognitions, but then also the forensics and the serial killer aspect, the deviant behavior from societal and social norms, and what happens, nature versus nurture kind of a thing. So went to college studying that. And then honestly, I transferred to Bloomington, and I'll go a little bit more into that as to why. Bloomington, Illinois, for Illinois State University, and graduated then with psychology and sociology in 2001. And honestly, I just wanted to use my degree. So someone, I was a server bartender at the time, knew someone from coming in, and he worked at a nonprofit agency supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm like, all right, I could use my degree. And that really sparked my love for helping marginalized populations in general. And it really, at the time, looking back now, I could see it, but at the time, I didn't realize how much it was helping me give a voice to some of my traumas that I had overcome. And advocacy, again, for marginalized populations, which I include children in that. Those that cannot advocate for themselves in general, or don't know how to, or don't have a voice to, or a platform to. So that's what really birthed my love for just behavioral science in general, I would say. And I took some career dips here and there. And what brought me back to this path was, I'm 43 now, and I'm ready to, I'm in a time and a place, a headspace, an energy space, a cognitive space to really fulfill what I feel is my calling, my path. But I needed to go through a lot of things to get to this point in my life.
Okay. So what kind of things? You mentioned you had to go through some things to kind of get to this point. So what kind of things brought you to where you're at now?
So I will start when, at a young age, what's made and comprised my identity at this point, 43 years old. We'll have to back up to, I want to say my earliest memory is at five-ish. And at this time, I wasn't aware of it, but this really sets this tone. So growing up in my family dynamic, I was the oldest child, the only child, and the youngest child. And so to understand what exactly that means is, I'm gonna take you on a little trip. And it can be a trip. So around 5, I really, my mother was a waitress raising 3 kids in government housing. So she was gone a lot. My sister and brother were charged to watching me. So this was the family dynamic where I was the youngest. So they were all 2 years apart. And in government housing at the time, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. and, run around the neighborhood. And so, and that being said, my sister and brother, they didn't care. I'm 5, my brother's 7, my sister's 9, and so they were somewhat resentful towards me because my mother showed favoritism towards me. I mean, it was pretty, even at 5 years old, I could feel it and sense it. So they're cruel to me, beat up on me. So that was my first, I'd probably say, realization with, battling security, trust, autonomy. Is at 5, I'm supposed to look up to my sister brother family unit, and they terrorized me whenever my mother wasn't home. And when she was, some bits and pieces I remember, she was a partier, meaning that she was engaging in, having people over, men over, drinking, whatnot. Because at this time, she's 22. And she got married to my brother and sister's father at 18 because she was raised strict Catholic. And she got pregnant when she was 18. So she had to marry the man. And so she had my sister, my brother, then she had me. Well, since she did get married to someone that she really truly didn't love, I guess when my brother was maybe 1 or something, they had separated. He was in the Vietnam. He became, I want to say addicted to some different things, but I think just recently I just found out there was like heroin involved, drinking, coming back, Agent Orange, the whole thing. So there's a lot of trauma going on my mother was dealing with, alcoholism and whatnot. So they separated. She had an affair, whatever. They were separated with what turns out to be my grandmother's mailman. And they had met in a bar down 9 yards. Turned out to be my dad. Well, that's important because on the back up, going back to the setting the tone. So my brother and sister, sensing that I was the favorite, because my mother felt guilty about having me out of wedlock, never told anyone, but I guess my sister and brother's father knew that I wasn't his. But my mother was going to take it to her grave. She later tells me. We'll come back to that as well. So meanwhile, all I know is a 5-year-old, I'm like, what's going on? My sister and brother's terrorizing me. My mom's partying because, they're separated now. She's like, sowing her wild oats, so to speak. And meanwhile, growing up and turning 6, turning 7, at this time, my sister and brother's father had moved out. Well, he calls my sister and brother. Holidays, they go visit him, they have split custody, but he never wanted to see me. So as a child, I couldn't understand, like, why doesn't my dad want to talk to my sister and brother, but doesn't want to talk to me? He wouldn't talk to me on the phone. He would send them Christmas presents, but wouldn't send me anything. I mean, it's like overt, like ostracizing. So I'm like, what the hell? So meanwhile, I'm developing from like 5 to 9 in an atmosphere that my sister and brother are resenting me because my mother shows favoritism. My father doesn't accept me, doesn't love me, and I don't know why. So my mother's out partying, but then she would dote on me when I was there, which caused me more problems. So it was a recipe for early developmental trauma and tragedy to come into play. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, so I started excelling in school. The one thing I could control in my environment, I learned this at an early age, survival, can't trust the people, my family members. And then also I could trust myself. I'm like, okay, so if I excel in school, the only thing I had, as a kid, you're growing up, that's all you do is go to school and other things. But so I was always straight A's, always I'm like, if I get good grades, maybe daddy will love me. So then fast forward a couple years, still nothing. So about, I would say 7, 8, 87, 86. Yeah, I'd say about 7 years old, my mother met a man. They started dating, they ended up being together for 7 years. And meanwhile, this man, we hit it off. I was like, finally, I have a father figure or like best friend figure, the whole 9 yards. And my sister did not get along with him, didn't like him. And my sister was always just angry. And I always thought it was because of the favoritism. Well, turns out this man had been molesting and sexually abusing my sister for a couple of years. And when it happened, when I turned 10, so they had been together for a couple of years at this point, for a few years. And what happened to me, because we had gotten along so well, and I told my mother about it, she believed me. My sister had been telling her, my mother never believed her. So that's another, I think, layer to my sister and mother's relationship. They've never recovered. They're not close to this day. And I mean, understandably, I'm not to judge. But so when I told my mother about it, it was just, it was hard for me at 10, because I'm like, man. And I remember this, and I remember the shirt I was wearing. I remember everything, just these thoughts that I had. And going through the experience, I'm like, my dad doesn't love me. This man, just wants whatever. And I'm like, so men, is it just shallow intention? My conceptualization of men and like the father or adult figures in my life were negative on many different levels. And I didn't have a strong, support or role model, the male figures. Even my grandfather, bad alcoholic, I remember he would pick us up on Sundays for church and have a Heineken on the dash. And like, we would go to church, and I'm like, and I remember then thinking about Catholicism, and I'd look around, and at the time I blamed God. I was like, I'm like, look around, and even then, like from 6 years old through 10 through these different years, I looked at it and I didn't know the word, but looking back, I'm like, I would think, what hypocrites. I see these adults do so many different things in my family, outside, things, my neighborhood, and then you come here and you think it's all okay. So you come for one day and you preach it to some mythical being, some thing that you guys, and I couldn't wrap my mind around, even at a young age. So that's I digress, religious, organized religion thing. So I didn't even have God to believe in, so to speak. And so when this happened, another truth came to light for me. This man happened to be a Black man. And so I saw on my mother's side of the family how deep racism ran through with the male figures. So now there's a couple of other things going in play. At 10, I knew, and this is what helped birth my love for psychology, the advocacy for children, what I was alluding to, is I knew it wasn't because of his race or because of his color or the things I was hearing, the anger, the threats, the things that the men wanted to do to this man. I was like, no, he's sick. I'm like, what grown man would find attraction to a girl and another girl that we were best friends? And I remember thinking this, Sean, at 10, I'm like, we were best friends. Why would he do that? Why would he betray me? And I remember not using the word betray in my head, but I'm like, why would he lie to me? Why does everyone lie? And even then, that's what birthed my passion for trying to understand the tormented mind. And adding that layer, I mean, at 10, this is another thing where I go with nature versus nurture. So a lot of people say racism runs in the family. It's something that they learn in their family unit. And that's why I say, no, inherently, I knew it was wrong, not because of his skin color, but at 10 years old, if you're hearing a lot of your family members spew a lot of racist shit and a lot of hatred towards the color of someone's skin, and you're still able to decipher and separate that and say, no, inherently, that's just wrong. That's one of my things from my own experience where I say, it's not necessarily always nurture in different circumstances. So racism saying it's taught. Again, it takes personalities, and that's a whole other layer to psychology. And I love the layers. I love the abstract to psychology too. So that's another reason number 81 that I'm drawn to the field. So then I start, typical my reaction to push down my traumas, to push down the feelings I didn't know how to reconcile. I couldn't figure out, couldn't understand. Because even at a young age, I was a logical interpreter. I'm like trying to make sense of my environment. And it just didn't feel right. It wasn't congruent. And so at an early age, being very young and impressionable, I'm like, fuck it. Started smoking cigarettes. And not a big deal, but I remember I'd like this. And it's like, I found refuge with my friends. There's a core group of us that just ran together. We all had some bullshit that we, obviously bonded on. And started smoking together, drinking, stealing cars, and it was our mother's car. It wasn't like from a dealership. That was a whole nother story. Anyways, I digress. I'm not very.
Sounds like you had quite the what would you say? Quite the exciting youth.
Yeah, it's only a tip of the iceberg. So thank you, Sean, for interrupting. Please feel free to interrupt me because.
Well, no, it's because I mean a lot. So one of the things that a lot of people don't seem to grasp or understand, and this is kind of goes back to what it was Jung that called the archetype the wounded healer. And so, people that typically tend to go into psychology or counseling, typically it's because, life hasn't exactly been good in one way or the other to somebody. Either, substance abuse, getting into trouble, childhood trauma, sexual trauma, or, just something. Like for me, I was bullied by people, and I never understood, like, there must be something wrong with me. I never thought it was something that was wrong with other people. And so, that was one key point where I got interested in psychology. And then two, there was, of course, the Nazis and the Holocaust. That was like, how can an entire country basically pathologized to that degree?
Right.
What caused that? And so I think we had a conversation once before where you asked me if my background was Russian because of my interest with like Stalin and Lenin and the Gulag camps. Actually, my background's Irish, not Russian or Jewish or German, but it's you had two pathological societies with belief systems that ran contrary to the belief systems of everywhere else, and it arose in this conflict. I mean, you take Nazi ideology, for example, it's predicated on the superiority on racial and ethnic and racial superiority doctrines, but it's different than, say, Italian fascism, because that was, supreme authority through the state. It was Italy. It was Italians belonged to the state of Italy, whereas with Nazis, it was about the blood, the Aryan blood kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have, the other end of the identity thing with like the Soviet Union was predicated on class, the rich versus the poor, and anybody that was considered successful, they were basically, exiled to Siberia to starve to death. They were executed on site, or, they were sent to the labor camps and they were enslaved and they were worked to death. And so, I was very interested in, well, what is it about that? Because political science and history doesn't really answer that question sufficiently, but it seems to me that it's the failure on the individual level of integrity that allows those systems to kind of pathologize in that way.
That's a great way to put it.
And then of course, Jung with the archetypes and analytical psychology and personality psychology. That, because when I started off, I wanted to be a social psychologist because, like I said, I was interested in World War II and pathological societies. The experimental methods are not the best, and so I kind of was like, okay, well, social psychology is not for me. Then I was thinking behavioral. That wasn't exactly a path I wanted to go through after a while, because behavioral analysis, it's like, you're looking at behaviors and looking at the analysis of behaviors of how to stop behaviors. It doesn't really go deep enough. And that's, of course, where Jung and the archetypes and personality psychology was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And then, of course, I thought with forensic psychology, that was like the investigative stuff you see on TV, but that's not the case. It's heavily research-based. So that's probably why I have got that one foot firmly steeped and scientific, while I have the other foot steeply, what would you say, like cemented within the mythological and philosophical and metaphysical realm. So it's kind of walking two worlds at the same time.
It's kind of like integrating like arts and science almost. It's funny, when I studied false memory as an undergrad, that's when I realized I did not want to do research. I'm like, and that's why I lean towards even possibly pursuing the PsyD. I like the clinical, I like the study of the people. Even now, working on a community coalition, that's a frustrating part to me because it's such a macro level. Bringing different sectors together, legislature, things like that, looking at the big macrocosms. And for me, it comes down to I loved how you unwrapped that, the individual level. And say that again, how did you phrase it?
Wait,
how societal will.
It pathologized on it was the individual failures of people to tell the truth about what was going on that allowed the society to pathologize. Solzhenitsyn had this really good quote about, if one individual told the truth, they could bring down an entire tyranny. And that was basically about being honest about what the hell was going on in the Soviet Union. Because one of the things that he thought was interesting is that this was probably about, this must have been year 4 or 5, because I think he did like 8 years out of a 10-year sentence of hard labor in the camps. Is that when people were coming in, they were so convinced that they were rabid adherents to the doctrines of communism, there was no idea, they had no idea as to what they could have done wrong to lay them in the camps, because they were like, I was the good communist, how could I be here? And of course, the big joke to Sultanates and all of them is like, this happens to everybody. It's just, we all knew about it, we just lied about it, and that's why we're here. But now, you're kind of part of the reason why this whole problem exists.
It's interesting, it reminds me of a story that I heard recently. Someone that, let's say, is tormented by addiction. And they were sharing a recollection from an episode. And the irony I found in listening to what they were saying and them not hearing what they were saying. So they're describing, like, man, I just feel really let down. So my question towards a relapse. And I said, why do you feel that happened or continues to happen? What's going on in your environment? And so that's when this person went into, I feel alone a lot. And I feel that I can't trust anyone, that there's betrayal all around me. People just want something from me. People are just out to get me. Man, people I would have never thought are lying to me, betraying me, and stealing from me. Like, someone broke into my mom's house and ripped her off. He's like, these are people I trusted and I believed in. And, I can't believe that they did that. And I said, so are you describing addiction or are you describing yourself? I said, anyone that's ever afflicted by addiction, it's the addiction that's doing these things. It's not the individual. And I wanted him to really come to his own awareness about the double-edged sword of, like, what you're saying is, like, you've either been there yourself, and this is what I shared from my personal story. I'm like, you describe probably my every Friday, like, but it's like, it's ironic that you don't see the mirror. You're not seeing yourself looking right back at you, because I know there's been plenty of times when I was submerged in my addiction that I was definitely using some people. I've definitely lied, stole, and cheated to get my drug, because it's an addiction. It's like takes over your mind. And it's just, for me, for some reason, the way they were relating, it's like, it was just totally not in the peripheral or even on the forefront of even conceiving that, like, oh, wow, I've done that to people. And I'm like, and especially knowing that if anyone's ever been afflicted by an addiction, this person's been afflicted for close to 15 years. So you can't say that you've had an honest addiction. And that's kind of like, what I found the irony.
Yeah. I mean, the most common lie is that, well, it's not that I have the alcohol problem, it's that you have the problem with the alcohol. Because I used to have a major alcoholism problem. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that came with the territory of being in a rock band,
Mm-hmm.
And it did cause some problems. And I realized that I was using it as a way to hide from, the fact that life is full of tragedy intrinsically. And finally, I got tired of hiding from it and decided, there's a responsibility here and it's time to face it. And, I'm not gonna lie, I do like to drink an occasional beer here and there, but I can say that I haven't touched hard liquor in, God, 7 or 8 years.
And it's funny, because then now we're going to bring it to full circle of what I currently do now. Is I work in behavioral health, and I work on a grant. Mm-hmm. And the grant for the state of Illinois looks at recovery supports for people when they leave the clinical setting. So in a nutshell, you're in a clinical treatment center, 28 days, 90 days, whichever. And side note, research shows that you're more probable for success doing 90 days. 28 days doesn't do shit. Just FYI for everyone. But rewind. And so when people are in this clinical controlled setting, they come out and there's all the triggers, environmental, people, places, things, You can't get away from yourself. So if you're given some tools in the clinical setting, we're not showing people how to translate those to their natural environment, because recovery and however you define that could be sobriety, it could be abstinence, it could be harm reduction, it could be, like I said, a few beers here and there. So the individual defines it. There's multiple pathways to addiction, and there's multiple pathways to recovery. And that's what the grant I operate is premised on. And it speaks to my spirit, it speaks to my personal history as well. And so when we are looking at community supports to help build up people, not only before they leave, but transition them to their community and set them up for success, then they're more likely not to have that revolving door, relapse. Again, it's only like 70%, increase in probability rate of preventing a relapse. But you have to have the relationship building, which we know is 101 with psychology or counseling. But two, there has to be a lot of community buy-in in general. Philosophically speaking, that one, people can and do recover from addiction. Two, it's not a moral choice. Three, and actually I want to get into this, I want to ask you this question.
Okay.
Do you feel alcoholism is a disease?
See, if you've ever noticed the way I always typically put these questions or answer these questions, it's not that I feel something, because that's emotional reasoning. I always try to say that I think something, because I could always be wrong. Do I think alcoholism is a disease? I don't. And the reason I say that is because diseases are things that just happen. Cancer is a disease. You just get cancer. Or COVID is a disease. You just get COVID. They're built into existence. I look at alcoholism as a choice, because life is intrinsically tragic and it's full of suffering, and you have a choice of what to do about that, right? And some people use alcohol for trying to self-medicate from if they're depressed, because alcohol can make you more extroverted, more filled with more positive emotion. I think I sent you, no, I didn't send you that paper. It was one on social anxiety disorder and was it cannabis use disorder, but alcohol use disorder also works with substance or with social anxiety.
Disorder, yeah.
Yeah, because that's why it's called the social lubricant. Some people need something to kind of open up, and they can be more filled with more positive emotion. Positive emotion, again, that's approach. So you're more willing to approach a social situation rather than withdraw from. And it's a good drug for anxiety, but the problem is it's a perfect drug for the moment. Once you go past that moment, then, well, that's when things can go off the rails. Because another thing that alcohol does is it makes you more prone to take risks. And it's not because alcohol doesn't make you stupid, because you can ask a person who's drunk about the risks of what they're going to do, and they can outline the risks perfectly. What it stops them from doing is caring about the risks. So that's the loosening of the inhibitions, because typically you won't, if you're risk averse, you don't take risks. But if you've got positive emotion and you're in that approach state, then of course you're going to take the risks. That's why a person can drive down the road at 80 miles an hour drunk. It's fun, but like so many things, but it's only fun, and you're only flying for about maybe 0.5 of a second until you have that sudden stop, and then, well, there you go. So and that's what it's a choice, because it's what you use it for. It's like I used it as a way to be on stage, because I had stage fright. I'm very, very high in neurotic. I'm higher in withdrawal aspect than I am volatility. So I don't have the emotional dysregulation, but I typically tend to. All was fine and well when we would practice in the garage. When we try to take it out from the garage onto the stage is when it was like, I'm supposed to sing and play guitar at the same time, and I've got like 50 people. I don't know who these fuckers are. Crap, what am I going to do? And that's when my buddy was like, well, hey, mix vodka and orange juice. Doesn't taste as bad. It'll be good. You can get up on stage. You can still play. There you go. So what started off with 2 screwdrivers ended up taking 4. Then it took 6. And then you can kind of see where this thing kind of went.
So knowing that the current trend is alcoholism from the research is a disease, things along those lines, what do you think, especially I work for a treatment and behavioral health facility, what do you think, knowing me, my stance is on that topic?
I would say that you probably view it as a disease. I'm thinking that could be the case, but I could be wrong about that too. Maybe you're more 50-50. Maybe it's part choice, maybe it's part disease. Maybe it goes so far long before it becomes a disease.
And you know what, and that's where you just landed is where I'm landing currently, because, and the reason why I pose this, because this is a philosophical, personal debate I have in my mind.
Okay.
Because I see for the agency I work for, this is a very much highly respected and held belief that drives a lot of our initiatives, funding, grants, opportunities, things along those lines, that alcoholism is a disease.
Okay.
And all right, so I take the research and I try to be objective, but I'm with you, especially the way you said. I said, but you know what? And they try, and people do try to compare cancer to alcoholism. I'm like, okay, that's bullshit in my opinion, because let me finish. Because free will sparks the alcoholism or the switch in the brain. It's all free will. Free will, I've never heard of free will causing cancer, or I've never seen it, I should say. And okay, we can always throw in the argument, tanning beds, things like that. I'm not going to get down that pathway. But my whole point, Sean, is that where you land at the end, I'm like, okay, to reconcile in my mind the two worlds is I feel that, yes, there's free will, but it kind of recircuits your brain wiring, the dopamine release, the neurotransmitter communication.
So I would say, okay, so I would say that you can make the argument that the disease is a result of a choice, kind of like this.
Yes, and that's where I land. But a lot of people are like, no, it's just, and that's why I had a problem with AA. It's like two absolute thinking. One, God has to take all these bad things from me. So, and I'm like, first off, I got to own my own shit for once in my life. But anyways, I won't get started there. But then two, that alcoholism is a disease or fighting a disease. That I'm like, no.
Well, see, that's why I look at it from the existential perspective, and it's funny because you're the second person that I've talked to that calls himself a self-proclaimed existentialist. The other person I'm referring to is the substance abuse counselor that works at Central State where I work. She's influenced by Irvin Yalom primarily. And like I said, before this program, I'd never heard of Irvin Yalom. Rollo May only in passing. So for me, existentialism, that's Heidegger, that's Kierkegaard, that's Frankl, that's Solzhenitsyn, that's Dostoevsky. I would throw Jung into the existential school, like an existential psychoanalytic school, because Jung was very into that's why he split from Freud, is because Freud was very much into the objective world and ridiculed Jung for sticking with spirituality and religious, as those are human universals to Jung's point, and therefore you can't just dispense with that when Freud was willing to dispense with that. And so when you mention existentialism, I don't want to presume too much, but what influenced you to kind of take the existential approach, or that's your philosophical orientation or philosophical tilt?
From the get-go, I learned to rely on my instinct and vibrations. And I would say I'm definitely guided by my intuitive, I would say intuitive hunches or instincts from experience. But I don't want to go off, how do I want to frame this? So as a side note, for instance, I do tarot cards, rune stones, all 9 yards. I've been doing them. My mother gave me my first deck when I was 15. But at the same time, here's the analogy. They don't predict the future. That's nonsensical. So it's really helping. It's an art form that helps you become more intuitive with your subjective side and mirroring the objective. So it's like internally what's going on in whatever kind of given situation, and some course of action that you could take depending upon where you are personally, and also the attributes that you are pulling out for the given situation. That, in a nutshell, in my opinion, personally, is tarot. And so the same thing in life. I have always been an empath. I can pick up on vibrations, body language, social cues. I think that's maybe one of my intelligent quotients, not quotient, but one of my intelligence levels is like reading people. That's why I was always turned on to the forensic psychology as well. I wanted to do detective work. But I would say from the get-go, I could trust, my instinct, even though I know I was doing some bad stuff from my different addictions, but underlying, I almost kind of always knew like the outcome or like how someone was, because my reality would confirm it. So my behavior would confirm a reality, and living in the moment and trusting in either my hypothetical constructs and really accentuating like what am I feeling now and figure out the motivation. But also I do interweave some developmental, because I do believe that there's certain things that we learn at certain stages in our life that have an effect or that keep replaying throughout life. Yeah. But I don't want to hone in on that either. So that's why you don't want to hone on the negative and things like that. Just like in the moment, what is it today? What can we reconcile today?
Yeah. So yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. And, I've actually have an interest in the tarot as far as like the archetypal representations of the major arcana. I think they are.
I figured you would. Every time you say that,
they're a reflection of Jung's archetypes in a sense, or you could say that, the cards have those archetypal representations, and you can see that from a Jungian perspective. That might be the better way of thinking about that. But so you're more of an experiential existentialist. You base it on your experience and your hunches, where I'm a philosophical existentialist. So like Pascal talked about, when you have the span of time then that, is before the time you were born. There's also the span of time after which you were born, but you were born when you were born into the circumstances that you were born into, and Heidegger called that thrownness. So you're kind of thrown into this existence.
I do believe in the synchronicity of certain happenings in life. That's what I mean by the trinity or the trilogy of all the coming together, my hunches, my empath, like the empathy that I'm able to pick up on other people's vibrations, my instinct, but also I believe in timing. There's synchronicity that is happening all around us. We have to be observant to pick up on it.
Yeah, that's what Jung talked about, like the narrative world and the objective world when they touch in certain places. Like if you pay attention to mythology and you look at these archetypal patterns as they're embodied, you could look at that way when people embody the archetypal representations, you can kind of see where the narrative world and the objective world touch at certain points, and that's what Jung called synchronicity. And so, it seems to me, and if I'm wrong about this, you can correct me, but it seems that you kind of tilt more toward like I said, Jung was kind of existentialist, if you think of it that way. So it's almost like without knowing, it's you know it, but you don't know it, but you're more of like a Jungian existentialist / psychoanalyst, because I think that's what the tarot is. It's basically you could say that is the archetype, prototypical analytic theorem. Okay, so maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Before Freud was looking at dreams and Jung was looking at archetypes, people that read the tarot were looking at these images on the cards and what the images meant, and then of course asking how those meanings are mirrored in the experience of the person that they're doing the readings for, and then they can kind of infer the motivations and the outcomes predicated on what I would say is probably, what would you say, a primitive prototypical version of psychoanalysis, I guess, is the right way of thinking about
it is, and I love how you unwrap that, because you're right. I know my beliefs, I know what I've done in practice, I know what I gravitate towards, but the way you described, I'm like, yeah. So that would be, if I had to categorize it, that's what I align with. That has always been a part of my spirit and essence from get-go. And I never even I never made the connection between Jungian perception and practice and applying that to the tarot, but it is. I mean, that's exactly what it is. So it's interesting. I'll have to reflect on this a little bit more.
I guess that's one thing I'm good for is, that's the marker of high openness too, is, divergent thinking too. And I think you kind of do the same thing. Like, you're able to make all these various connections across different topics, and you're able to abstract out commonalities. And it seems like divergent thinking, but it actually is kind of linear in a way, even though it's kind of hidden in the backdrop of all these different things.
I can agree with that. And it's funny because you hear me say quite a bit, I'm not a linear thinker or talker, which where my story goes, it might be like over here to this tree, over here to this sidewalk, but it's also on the same roadmap.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so we were talking about, so you were talking about how you kind of, okay, so
Oh, let me
University,
finish my story.
okay,
Of like, so we're up to my teen years, and then we'll branch off to some more discussions. Probably, I'm not going to go through every year,
okay, okay,
but just a major milestone. So basically, college. It was a collegiate, happy-go-lucky. Very much right before college. This is a turning. These are like one of those moments where you could see the fork in the road, and even now, I could still feel it. It was the first or second week of October, and this is 1995.
mhm,
And so I'm 17. No, it was 96. I had just graduated high school. I graduated in 95. So it was 96. And going back to the marginalized populations, my brother was bullied and picked on relentlessly because he didn't come out as gay, but he was, it was kind of figured that he was gay. And where he was like terrorizing Jim. There was bad. And so from there too, I was protective because I was, bigger, broader. My sister and brother are very petite. They're both like 5'7". Another indicator, brown eyes. Another indicator, we kind of joked that I had a different dad. Well, kind of turned out to be true. And so let's fast forward. I was protecting him one day in the government housing. And so this kid was just picking on him. And I just got back from softball practice. And I'm like, I'm like, what the hell? And so I got hit with the baseball bat that I had, I was threatening him. I'm like, no, Angie, don't do this. Because the kid was like 8, 9, and I'm obviously older, 17. And so bashes me in the leg with the baseball bat. And my mother, knowing that we don't have insurance or money, she's like, we have to go to the ER. I'm like, no. So she made me go. And that's how I'm like frustrated because I'm working at Sears, the whole 9 yards. And I get stuck with the bill. It was just a bad bruise underneath. It was like still $900. I'll never forget this. I'm like, I didn't want to freaking go. And so that was just kind of like an underlying thing to my mom. She means well, but she has an agenda. And she's always been a grifter. If you don't know what a grifter is,
I've been accused of it, so I know what a grifter is. It's someone who says they say something just to kind of fit in with what's popular, I guess.
No, grifter is like a scammer. It's like the movie The Grifter.
Oh, like a con man. Okay.
Yes. And so she had some underlying those traits. I won't go into her whole story, but it was just like, man, I don't want to do this, and I was just pissed about getting the bill. Anyway, so that same week, I had saved up my money for a new car. It was a Ford Tempo that had a tape deck in the whole 9 yards. I'd just drive around because, in my environment. So just driving around. And even at this time, I really didn't like the taste of alcohol. I had my first joint with my sister when I was in 7th grade. So that's 11 too, cigarettes, smoking joint. And then I liked the high, I liked the mellowness, but it took me a while to build up my like for alcohol. I forced myself to like it eventually. We'll get to that too. And so basically this week, so driving, and long story short, kid hits me in the leg with a baseball bat, crash, get bad bruise, $800 bill on crutches. So then me and my friends get a hotel room that Friday with my car, get rear-ended by a drunk driver, has no insurance, but he had fake insurance. Bourbon cops wouldn't do anything after fact. So my car got totaled, uninsured, didn't get anything. And that's the same week that my aunt was pissed at my mom for something, and to get back at her, told me I had a different dad. So all in 1 week.
It sounds like it was a hell of a week.
It was a hell of a week. And like I said, the second week of October. So I'm gonna back up just a couple months. So right after high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. No one there's guidance counselors, but again, no one's guiding me throughout high school. So I'm like, I don't know. In the senior year, how I took my ACTs. I dropped acid the night before and just went there, 2 hours sleep. I got a 27. I thought that was pretty good. My brother, though, my sister brother on my dad's side, he got 35 once and 36 the second time, whatever. Perfect score. But he was valedictorian. Anyways, I digress. But that was a couple of years ago, too. So, long story short, too late. That year just trying to figure out what I want to do. That summer, my guy friends were like, why don't you go get a mall job? And this is before like me, working at Sears. And I became a roofer with them. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it because I proved I could do it. So that summer I tore off with them, everything. I was like, you know what, F you. If you say I can't do something, I'm gonna prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And that comes from like the survival tactics and not feeling loved and the whole 9 yards. So became a roofer. So that same week, and it was the stereotypical, they're roofers, crackheads. Stereotypical, and sorry, everyone out there, I'm not trying to perpetuate that stereotype. This is back in 1996. I was paid under the table, $6 a freaking hour, doing some hard labor, man. If anyone's ever been a roofer, it's some hard shit.
This is for me, this podcast thing, this is free speech. If you want to say that, nobody's going to say anything about it.
Okay, good. And you know what they did? F them. I put it this way, I don't search for external validation anymore. I'm good. I'm good. So fast forward to that October, that happened. And we all got off the job and everything. And I'm like, fuck it, just give me the pipe. And it was during the day. I'll never forget this. It was in this guy's basement, Dan. It was just me and him. And we were good friends with the dealers. I mean, there's a lot of dealers in town. I mean, Kinky, if you don't know anything about it, there's a lot going on. It's like at the time, mini Chicago, which is about 45 minutes south of Chicago. And in the bad aspects of, pretty drugs and things like that. So anyways, he gives me the pipe, and I'll never forget my first hit. I was like, it was mind blowing. I was sitting on a weight bench, and I remember just seeing the sun come in, and it was intense. And it wasn't like, well, I've never done heroin, but I hear people describe heroin as like everything your body goes numb. Kind of like that. It was like that wah wah, the whole 9 yards. But for me, it wasn't even at that time that I was trying to push feelings away. It didn't make me feel better. It got me high. It was a good body buzz, and it tasted good. It was so weird. It was a good taste. Even to this day, I can still smell it and remember freebasing and all of that. Doesn't trigger me to want to do it now. But I will say that definitely awakened I love the smell of cocaine. I mean, and I probably always will. That's a joke. Smell of cocaine. Sorry.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that's something that I don't like grapple with any kind of triggers or wanting to use it. But man, I can sit back. It's kind of like when I watch those rockumentaries of like anyone from Floyd, from Aerosmith, Eagles, talk about these like 20 years that were just great times. I tell you what, my 20s and 30s were effing phenomenal. I smoked a joint with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes in Florida at Bob Marley Fest. Like, I mean, there's some crazy things that I'm not going to weave in and out. But I definitely have always lived in the moment. I definitely after class one time in Champaign, like, let's go to New York and go on fish tour. I'm like, all right. And so we left the next day, came back for class on Monday. So that was the thing though, Sean, that I want to circle back to. I'm glad I reminded myself. In college even, I was on the honor society. I mean, I would pull all-nighters, go straight to class and be like, okay, and just poli-sci. It's funny you bring up political science. I had poli-sci 1 and 2. And I ended up becoming good friends with the prof that we actually end up like going to the strip club. Nothing sexual ever between us, but it was just such cool synchronous moments in my time where people and experience and vibrations intersected in a way to where I look back and I'm like, man, anyone else is like, I wouldn't believe it. So those different circumstances, that's why synchronicity has been an underlying theme for my whole life. And honestly, 9 out of 10, it was great times. There's some hard moments, some rocks in that shuffle, more diamonds though. And I would say the diamonds in the form of experience, awakening myself to different either musical things, beauty, travels, people. Man, the people I have met have definitely opened up my third eye on so many different levels that, man, I would not trade those experiences. And the ones that I remember, there's plenty that I'm like, I'll bust out a photo album where I'll run into someone and they're like, I'm like, no, but it sounds like a fabulous fucking time. And so it's like, even the ones I remember. So overall, I would say the trauma was worth the pathway that led me down. But it's at the same time, that's why it brings me to the moment now. Why am I existentialist? Because of those experiences, but I can also sit back and reflect. Like, I knew when it was like my rock bottom. Throughout those times, to kind of, summarize, I OD'd in Champaign, so I transferred here. I left Kankakee because, I was drowning, man. I just woke up one day, and another synchronous moment, my dad was always straight laced, like always, like when I met him when I was 18, which I did meet him, fantastic man, and everything. It took about 10, 15 years for us to get close because I never had that. I didn't trust that kind of a bond, but it has developed over time. And another synchronous moment, I never knew he was a crackhead too. He stopped August 6th, 1984. I stopped August 6th, 1996, the first time. So it's like, when you ask, it's like those tangible moments that I can actually hone in on. And there's quite a few of those that I remember that I'm like, huh. And it's like, those parallels don't just happen. And it was ironic because I was so scared to tell this man I just met that, yeah, I'm a crackhead, I'm going to school in Champaign. And it just came out in an organic conversation one day. And I'm like, no shit. I'm like, August 6th. I'm sorry, August 8th. And it was just so uncanny, the same day and everything. But we both relapsed. And actually, at a time, I won't go too much into this, but a few years back, I ended up getting him pills. So I became his dealer, and this relapse after 20 something years, almost 25 years. And I remember when I was doing this is just a few years ago, that I'm like, man, I feel like so close to my father, but it's like, because it's something he wants from me. So like, going back to that one story that gentleman was sharing, like, it's addiction. There's always a time when you become someone's best friend, the favorite daughter. And it's like, it felt good to hold that title for a moment, no matter what the means were to the end.
Yeah.
But then that came to the surface. So that's just a small snippet. But so I OD, transfer to Bloomington. Fast forward, hard years, 20s, 30s. I was with U of I when I was at an agency supporting people at ID and DD. So as to give presentations with them. Went to Wisconsin to give a lecture. And I couldn't make it the next day because I partied so hard the night before that I ended up going to the hospital, broke my leg. One of the girls from U of I had to drive my car back. And it was just like, these escapades are not few and far between. But there's many close brushes with death that I OD'd, a couple of car accidents. One that I remember in Champaign, that I kept driving and I was giving these people a ride home, which I don't know why they thought I was suitable. Put it this way, I had rear-ended someone and kept driving, didn't realize it. My windshield was gone. My right front end was in the car. Like, I built up to where I could still drive though. It felt like I hit a bump. And like, you could just let us out. And it was like a dreamlike state. And it still didn't all come together. Didn't get a ticket. I've been so fortunate, and I don't even need to knock on wood because I don't do a lot of shit like that I've been very lucky with the law. Scanned Visa credit card for 10 grand when I was 17, just because I knew I could. It was not my best friend, but one of the friends I ran with, we're like, let's do it. It took us 8 hours on the phone, getting traveler's checks wired to 5 different banks. I had her go to the banks and act like her grandmother, very sick. And at this time, this was back in, it had been 94, because I graduated in 95, so the end of 94. And basically we got away with it. They took off. And the only reason why I got away with it, because I'm not a dumbass, and the state prosecuted me. They waited till I was 18. So I was like, of course you did. And they waited, and then when I was in court, the prosecutors trying to put it all on me, and Judge McKellar, I'll never forget this. I still have the paperwork. It's kind of cool looking back. Don't want to show my kids just yet. Give them too many ideas. But I said to the Judge McKellar, I'm like, I wasn't the only one involved. The state is trying to put all of this on me. And so they screwed their case because they never divulged that information. They would have just said that they tried to prosecute, but they tried to set the case up, and it was just me, the sole, not only beneficiary or benefactor, sorry, my bad. Or I still don't think I'm using
conspirator.
Yeah, thank you. Well, not that, but the only one that the extortionist, the only one that receive anything. I can't remember the exact term. But I was like, no. And on top of that, when I was getting arrested, when the detectives came into my high school and got me, I'm reading the Miranda rights. I'm like, there's a misspelled word. Like, you know, and it's funny because I know you'd find humor in that because I know you and I would probably pick up on that. It's like, and he's like, I've read, so many people have read this statement and no one's ever picked up on that. He's like, don't go down the life of crime. Another synchronous moment of like,
Yeah.
you know, these different things that have just happened. The last one, and I'll wrap it up and let you talk, is fast forward. What, you know, really brought to my awareness I needed to go to treatment was through the drugs, through when going to, I transferred from crack cocaine to bulimia when I transferred schools, one addiction for another, because I felt that couldn't hurt anyone. I couldn't get crack. So I'm like, oh, I'll make myself eat and throw it up. So fast forward through that, 30s party, whatever. I would say, what year is this? 2018, 2017. My husband stopped working and just had this whole, his own blowout. We've talked about that. I don't want to bring a lot of attention. That's his story. Anyways, it didn't have a good effect on me. So I drank even more and ended up having, waking up in the ICU 2 days before Thanksgiving in 2018 with a traumatic brain injury. And to this day, I don't know what happened. The last thing I remembered was we were playing cards, and I'm not a big gambler, never have been. He's more of the gambler, kind of goes in the whole repertoire of addiction, things like that. And mine was, if anything, mine was bulimia, his was gambling to complement our other ones. And so I go up to have a cigarette. No, he went up to have a cigarette. And next thing I knew, I woke up in ICU. All I can speculate is that I used to leave the treatment center and get a couple of pints of vodka, drink one on the way home, and when I got home, drink the other one, and then drink wine throughout the night. And I would talk to you just like this after, like, and so it's like my tolerance is pretty high. And so all I can speculate is I went to get up and maybe join him for a cigarette. What I've been told, and let me premise also by saying there has not been a history of domestic violence in our relationship. So there wasn't ever a time, if anything, he shared, I was a personal trainer, he's scared of me more so than, you know, him being aggressive, rightfully so. I can hold my own. So he found me, I guess. He had went upstairs to bed. Again, I don't know. This all told to me. He found me at the bottom of the stairs, like, Angie, come on, let's go to bed. And I wasn't moving. So he came down, he's like, come on. And he, I guess, slapped my face a couple of times. I wasn't coming to, so I was out. My daughters are sleeping in bed. Next thing I know, he calls paramedic, 911. They had to come resuscitate me. My sister-in-law and my brother-in-law had to come get the girls. I caught a DCFS case. I was investigated after this fact. And so the next thing I know, I wake up in ICU. I want to say now a few hours later. And here I'm going to pause and say, I don't remember a lot of this hospital experience because, and I thought about this earlier, I have the brain scan of my brain. I've never looked at it, Sean, and I don't know why.
Or is it a fear of what you're going to find?
Yeah, I don't know. And I just found that curious. And I've tried to put in, it's, you know, one of those things you have to put in a computer, it's a CD-ROM, whatever. But I really want to know. I'm to the point, I'm like, I'm curious to see at that time what it was like. But woke up, I guess what had happened, they're about to drill a hole in my head because the pressure was getting so bad. They had resuscitated me, brought me back. I was on, you know, support, the whole 9 yards. And the rounding general surgeons wanted to drill a hole, but then the woman that had like 30 years experience, she had come, she's like, no, she saw involuntary twitching. So she's like, don't drill. And so I guess that was a lifesaver because from there, from my understanding, she shared that I woke up probably a couple hours later. And I was there around Thanksgiving, 2018. I was there for a few days. And that's another thing that I find interesting. All of these things, I bounced back. I was able to do burpees like 2 months later. My biggest residual is like I'll be talking and I'll forget mid-sentence what my thought is going. I've gotten better with college, and honestly, I think I shared this in our first class when I was writing a paper. That's hard for me to translate some of my thoughts on paper because of my injury. That's really the biggest thing.
Well, I mean, you talk about bouncing back and then you've gotten better with that. Well, I mean, the brain is very, I mean, they call it plasticity, right?
Yes.
Because the neurons can grow back. And it seems like because you're engaging in activities that's these intellectual enterprises that are allowing you to kind of, you're thinking. So you're making new neural connections to kind of work around where the brain injury may happen. And say that's a relatively new concept in neuroscience. I want to say at least in the last 10 years that the brain can.
Yeah, the neuroplasticity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the neuroplasticity. And there's a really good book I highly recommend. It's by a psychiatrist from England. His name's Ian McGilchrist, and it's called The Master and His Emissary. And he talks about, the hemispherical specializations of the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
The master of what?
The Master and His Emissary.
And so, yeah, basically, from there, I got out and I was sober, I would say, not drinking. I went over to a friend's house, a neighbor's house in February. And at this time, I lived in a neighborhood that was kind of hoity-toity. Lived on a golf course. That's, hearing from my upbringing, that's not my style. And so I think that social interaction, I try to fit in so well, and it was stressful. Forced socialization is very stressful for me.
Yeah.
I don't know the expect, and then that's when I find that external validation, like, okay, am I making a bad impression? Are they getting me? Because I know I'm quirky. I know I'm seasoned because of my experiences. Like, I can rub people wrong, or they don't know how to take me, kind of a thing. So those kind of things, already not fitting in my neighborhood. And the conversation was like, oh, well, they have this, like, very materialistic and attached to items. I'm very much about unattachment. I detached myself, like, from the material world, and and even I'm not really even married to a lot of philosophical beliefs. I ebb and flow. And there's that's a big thing with Buddhism as well. I've always gravitated towards Buddhism and non-attachment. And so I remember this. It was like right around Valentine's Day. I went home and I was just like, oh, it was so draining just socializing with her. And I knew my husband had Seagram's, erase my cases. And so and that would be my favorite times. Like early in the morning when no one else is awake. And, and I just started chugging the bottle. And for me, once I start, I don't stop. I'm an equal opportunity player and an overachiever, even in my addiction. So with that being said, fast forward to May, I couldn't shake it. I'm like, fuck, even after brain injury, man, I've OD'd. I'm like, man, whatever it is, if it's Buddha, if it's Allah, if it's Muhammad, if it's God, if it's Jesus, whomever, it really hit me for some reason. There's a reason why I'm here. I'm missing the message. I'm missing my message, and I'm getting detoured to get back on my message. So I think it was early May. I called the treatment center, not the one I worked at. There's only one other one here in my town. And I'm like, look, I think I just need to check myself in. And I remember scrutinizing my decision and just being so fearful. And I worked for a behavioral treatment center, so scared to tell my bosses and everyone. But I'm like, they're all in effing recovery. So I put myself in those shoes too, how hard it is for people that are not even in this circle to deal with the stigma and, to seek help, to reach out for help. So that really played with me. And then I will say, and I'll wrap it up, that the only person that was against me was my husband. And it was because I was destroying, without his permission, our identity. We had been partying and dating, like we met New Year's Eve 2009. I was just got out of an engagement. So I like to say, looking back even now recently within the last couple of weeks, I've been in an engagement and marriage with alcohol for 20 years. I was with my daughter's father for 6 years. Then Reed was next, my first fiance, for 3 years, and then right over to Mike, and all of them a few months in between. And we can go into that whole codependency thing some other time. Maybe we'll start a series. But with that being said, and that was hard because I understood, psychologically speaking, and brings it full circle, not only existentialism, but I understand people where I can empathize where people are coming from. And if I don't understand, it's not my point to understand everyone's shit. That's not the point of being a counselor or even trying to help them with their, people are right here trying to help people, I think is the wrong motivation. Yeah, so I would say that was something to deal with. So-
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense because I mean, let's see, I was, or my mom died when I was 20. She was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 18. My dad died 14 months later, and then I moved in with the gal that I was dating at the time. It was shortly after that that I started, playing music, and that was getting into playing live and getting out of the garage. That was my buddy's way of trying to help me because I had developed panic disorder and agoraphobia. I had my first panic attack a month after my dad died. And he got to
How
the
did
point
your
where
dad die, if you don't mind my asking?
he went to bed and just didn't wake up. We think it was an aneurysm.
Okay.
And so I had my first panic attack, and that scared the shit out of me. And then, I got to where I had them outside of the house I was living in, and so I was afraid of leaving the house. And so my best friend was like, I've got a drum kit now. You play guitar. He's like, well, why don't we play music? Like, why isn't this happening? And I was like, well, I kind of don't want to leave the house because I don't want to like die on the way to your house. He's like, I don't care how long it takes. It's like, just come over. He's like, I don't care how many times you have to turn around and go back, but you're going to eventually have to make it here. If we're going to do this thing that we'd been talking about doing when we were in high school. And so that was a motivation. It took me about a week, but I was able to finally make it over to his house after several failed attempts. And so that's kind of how I kicked that, was the whole, and that's the idea of exposure therapy, right? Facing voluntarily what you're afraid of. So I was, motivated to go play music with my buddy, and that kind of moved me away from being a shut-in and a hermit. And of course, then it's like I said, you get out of the garage and get into play, and in front of people you don't know, and nerves hit. Of course, my buddy was like, well, you're old enough, we can do this. And so then, vodka was the drink of choice, and I rode that wave from 2005 till about 2009, 2010, and then finally, Christina, God love her, she was like, you need to stop. She's like, this isn't working out for you. You're going to college to do things. You're not. She's like, you're much smarter than that. You need to stop.
And I think it's really refreshing to hear you say and recount that she said that, this isn't doing anything for you. It wasn't about her at all. And in relationships, that could be the front. You can't do this to the family anymore. You can't do this. It's always about them. But you really honed in on bringing the focus on to you. That's very refreshing.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, okay, and so I went without that. And then, I still like to, I was substituting liquor with beer. And then my Christina again was like, she's like, you're getting up there in the advanced classes. You're extremely intelligent. Do you really want to? You're building something here. Maybe you need to slow down. And so it's like, okay. So it's like now, I can have I don't do IPAs or anything like that. I'm strictly like a Guinness guy, and it's like one or two cans, in a glass. I don't drink out of the can. You don't do that with a stout. What's wrong with you?
I was gonna say, I do remember that.
but one or two glasses, and that's like every couple of weeks, and she's right. I'm trying to do something. There's an ideal there, and she wants what's best for me. It's like you said, it's not about the other person. It's about what's best for the individual. So, and so that's kind of I can empathize with people that have had drinking problems because that was a choice, right? It's like here I am. I didn't ask to be in a situation where both my parents are going to die before I'm ready to be an adult on my own. I'm thrown into that existence and thrown into adulthood, roughly speaking, when you think about it. Because I mean, there's no way I could have afforded the mortgage for that house or to keep any of those things. I literally would have had nowhere to go. I was thrown into that. And so I chose, wanting to play music and do the whole rock star thing because that's what I wanted to do. But, the area I was living in, it wasn't exactly tenable, but it was fun for a few years. I don't regret any of that, but I think this is kind of the right path.
Yeah.
And you know, and this kind of comes to the program where you're talking about synchronicity and all of that, is that, you know, it's you know, I didn't know what to expect when I jumped into the counseling program, because, you know, I had reservations, because it's like, you know, you start reading the handbook that they give you when they talk about the counselor identity, and it's like, well, crap, because, you know, I'm a psychologist. That's how I see it, and I'm not throwing that title away. Period. I worked 7 years for it. You're no. And but out of all of the, it seems like out of all the cohorts and all the classes, it seems like you and I seem to kind of actually kind of understand each other's perspectives fairly well, whereas you've seen the conflicts I've had with other professors, other students at times, and it's not like I go looking for conflict. I don't.
And I think it's different personalities that I've seen is their response, and they don't know how to take you. And I think sometimes that they feel that you're very shut off and shut down and stoic, but in an arrogant tone. And I don't think you mean to give off that vibe, because I do understand where you're coming from. But I think you're exuding through, I think the social anxiety and fear, it comes off as very protective. I mean, you're protecting yourself, but it comes off very arrogant. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I think people are not wanting to go to the deeper levels to get to know you. They're feeling like, okay, he looks down at me. But honestly, it's a lot of fear that's underlying your surface. And so it's when you're breaking through those barriers, it's like softening that exterior, but I don't think you're ready to soften your exterior to let people in.
Well, again, it's like, you know, well, it's kind of, and, you know, I talked to one of the people in the group thing. You know, I mentioned a quote by Jung about, you know, loneliness isn't about not having anybody about you. It's when you have things that you don't feel like you can talk to with other people, or that you may hold views that are what would you say, inadmissible to other people. And I think that especially those two parts to it, I think are kind of part of that, as far as, like, you know, I am very guarded in this class, because I don't hold a lot of the same political viewpoints. You know, I'm not a hardcore conservative as I've been accused of being. I've been called racist and Nazi because I don't fall in line with radical leftist ideology. And so it's like I have to watch what I say, because, I mean, we've talked about this, you know, like with the pronoun thing. You know, I don't criticize people that you know, have something to lose if they don't fall like that. Like you were mentioning with your grants, if I remember correctly, you kind of have to do this for your grants, and if you don't fall in line, they're insisting on it by force, meaning that it's punitive.
No, and honestly, no, I'm glad you brought that up. No one's enforcing it or even imposing it. This is my thing, and it's actually a good analogy to the mask wearing. I feel that if it's important to that person or to someone, it doesn't hurt me. And if anything, I can empathize how pronouns are important to some people because of their experience. And so to support that understanding, I will use pronouns, because honestly, it doesn't go against my grain. And I don't feel like I'm being a sheep to social conformity. I feel I'm empathizing with a marginalized population that it is important to. And so it's really from my view of, like, my philosophy in general, human beings and human nature and human interaction, that I choose, because I do operate these grants. And I wanted to show that in different ways I support this population, because that is ingrained in me as well, is advocacy for marginalized populations in general.
Okay, and I'm not going to criticize you for that. I think that's a very important thing to distinguish. But in some instances, and I'm probably sure, so I live in a more metropolitan area, so it's definitely got more of your there's a lot of different universities, and in the universities you do get the activist types that try to, I guess, impose their values on other people, right? And so one of the reasons why I won't play the pronoun game is it's like, first of all, why is it you can choose your own pronoun but you can't choose your own acronym, right? Because they talk about identity being socially constructed or your subjective experience. And I was rewatching a debate today, and there was this thing that Jordan Peterson said that I really liked, and he quoted Louis C.K. from this. It's like, if you call someone an asshole, it's not like that person can object. It's actually up to somebody else to kind of make their own opinion on that valuation of that individual, right?
It's your reaction to your environment. You're not bothered by what he's saying. You're bothered by your reaction.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, well, why can you choose your pronoun, but you can't choose? If you can choose your own pronoun, why can't you choose your own adjective, right? And we were talking, and he was talking about, like, within Canada, like, it's by law you have to use alternate pronouns, and I think in New York there's 71 different gender identities that are considered protected under the law, by state law, by the state of New York, and there's not even a agreed upon lexicon of what you described as different identities. 71 different identities. Come on.
Well, it's kind of mental health counseling even.
And here's the thing is, I refuse to concede linguistic territory, because if I were to do that, then I'm agreeing to play to a game that somebody else has established the rules for, and at that point you lose automatically.
I can see where you're coming from, and I can respect your stance.
Well, I mean, that's what speech is how you think. A lot, like,
right.
The only person I know that can think without really speaking would be like Dostoevsky. Like, if you've ever read the Brothers Karamazov, he actually makes arguments with his characters, and he makes steel man out of all these different arguments based on their characters. For most people, we think through speaking. And so if someone demands that you have to say a certain amount of words, well, who the hell are you to decide what speech I use? Like, no. That's a no-go, and that's a non-starter for me. And so, if my job ever decided to say, well, we need you to put these in your email, I'm going to tell them absolutely not.
It's funny. My job actually told people to take that away from their email, because they didn't want. They're kind of actually. I had to kind of fight for my. Does that sound funny?
Well, no, it doesn't. It actually makes a lot of sense, because you've probably seen there's a lot of backlash against this woke radical left nonsense. You've probably heard the phrase now. It's, if you go woke, go broke.
No, I've heard the phrase.
And so it's. And again, it's also predicated on the fact that I'm not going to concede linguistic territory to people whose philosophical, I would say, their philosophical standpoint, their political viewpoint, and even at a deeper level, their moral standpoint is different than mine. It's like, we can negotiate these things, because to me, it's like, I will call you whatever you want to be called and however you present yourself, and that's negotiated socially. And if you're going to make a demand, sorry, you're not going to demand anything. I mean, because that all that says is that's narcissistic grandstanding, or it's virtue signaling in some sense, and there's nothing genuine about that either. And so it's like, one of the things, and I've been criticized for it a lot. This is where this whole idea of, well, Sean's a Nazi or Sean's a this or that, is because I won't toe the line, and I'm willing to take the consequences of my actions for that, because I have principles, and I'm not willing to sell those out.
And that's where I think I even have a T-shirt that says, you can make your choices, but you cannot be free from the outcomes or the outcomes of your choices. And so it's like, yeah, as long as you own the outcome, I mean, no one can really argue with that. You got to stand by your beliefs and your convictions and your philosophies, and hey, I'm on the outcome.
Well, that's what you try to do. Like, if you try to tell the truth, what you're saying is that no matter how ignorant you are, or how stupid you are, how biased you are, or whatever, you're willing to say what you think, let go of the outcomes, because it's really true that you're going to pay a price for everything you do and everything you don't do. You don't get to choose not to pay a price, but you get to choose.
That's a choice.
But you get to choose what poison you're going to take.
Mm-hmm.
And I choose to take the poison that that comes with, as long as I'm saying what I think to be true.
And for me, I've added another layer to that. Now I need to make sure that my definition of truth is in alignment with the reality. Because sometimes I need to make sure that I'm perceiving everything in for me, a logical manner, not emotionally, not, I need to operation define what lens I'm viewing the situation from to define the truth. The truth doesn't necessarily translate to the same situation, the same players. There's timing, there's emotions involved, things like that.
Well, see,
Yeah,
I'll try not to keep you for too much longer, but there's an idea that Socrates had. He called it his daemon, I think is what he called it. But it's like that little voice of conscience that you have because this is one of the things I tell the patients in the different groups that I teach, like with Injure, when we discuss the Gulag Archipelago and Man's Search for Meaning, is that the first thing that you can do if you're going to try to make changes, you need to stop saying things that you know to be lies. It's not the same as telling the truth because you're not good enough at that yet. But you can.
How do you know? It goes back to, though, you don't know what you don't know. You need to explore and investigate that it is a validated lie or not, or it's a validated truth or not. Does that make sense?
Well, it kind of does, but you definitely know things that aren't true based on whatever your definition of truth is, right?
Not always. Your perception may be skewed. You may not have all the information that you need. So I think to have an absolute thinking is very difficult for me because you don't always know that it's true. Unless it comes down to, I'll be honest, with math, numbers don't lie. That's why I do have a lot of respect for math. But when it comes down to constructs and paradigms and perception, especially when you bring in human behavior, the standard measure of error, even with human behavior and perception, that how do you say it's 100% truth? Unless it's like math and science and some things, aspects of science. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay, a person can stop saying things they know to be objectively false.
Okay.
Okay, so
stop being
stop being a liar, right? Stop saying things that you know to be objectively false.
Because
that's not the same as telling the truth. Because a person's not good enough at that. A person who's good at telling the truth is willing to be able to understand themselves and to be honest about and with themselves.
Yes.
That's to me is because we can get into the truth problem because there's objective or scientific truth, and then there's, of course, the metaphorical truth, right? That's
right.
The religious truth falls under metaphorical truth. And that's where I kind of have, like I said, I have that foot in the scientific realm, and I also have the foot in the mythological realm, I would say. And so, that's one of the first things I say is, if you're going to tell the truth, but it goes back to the voice of conscience. You know what you believe if you scrutinize it enough. It's like when you start to speak, if you pay attention to that, then you'll start to, when you get ready to say something, you think, well, do I really believe this? If I don't really believe this, why am I going to say it? What's the cost if I say something that I don't honestly believe? Well, that's where you get into that incongruence problem. That's where the mind and the body are not exactly aligned, or at least your mind and your speech are not. And so, in order for me to be able to try to live in that truth, it's like, do I believe X? Well, if I don't believe it, then I'm not going to say it. And so if I honestly think that conceding linguistic territory to, say, adversaries, let's say, because like I said, I'm not going to concede that to people whose political, philosophical, and moral standpoints are different than mine, that's a non-starter, then no, I'm not going to do that. And we know what happens when people do that. That's kind of one of the things that, Sullivan talked about when, individuals lied about everything that was going on. That's what allowed a system to kind of grow into what basically he called the organs, right? You had the organs that was, at the head you had Stalin and the Communist Party of Russia. And then you had, the Cheka and the secret police that were having these arrest quotas and were arresting people and doing these show trials. And then, he basically the way he put it in the Gulag Archipelago was that the Gulag camps was much like the intestines or the sewer of the Soviet organs, and basically all it did was it grounded meat in and shit everything else out.
Okay. I don't know where you're going with this.
So where I'm going with it is that I honestly think that the philosophy behind the things that people are saying that you have to say, even if you don't believe it, they make it to where if you don't say it, you can lose your job or lose a grant or what have you, that they'll come after you basically with pitchforks in a sense. That if you go along with it, then you add to that path, you add to the pathologizing of that. And so I'm not willing to do that.
And I don't think, the only thing I feel that I'm forced to do are taxes and a couple other like absolutes. But philosophically speaking, even language or arguments or conversations or belief systems, I don't feel there's anything that's in general even in that we're forced to prescribe or subscribe to. That comes down to one's perception. That there's nothing, I mean, aside from like general laws, it's either you break it or you don't, you go to jail. You know what I mean? There's like certain, but I don't think, I'm not, and I think it's a way that people perceive the propaganda. And what I mean by that, sticking even with the pronouns, that can be viewed as propaganda. For me, I don't take it as, no one's forcing anyone to say anything, except where there are legalities, which I do not agree with that. And I do agree with you with that aspect of like, okay, you can't force me to use this pronouns. Now we're going a little bit.
Well, even the social, like, I don't even agree with the social enforcement, right? Like, okay, it used to be, it didn't used to be a controversial statement to say that, you know, biological sex, gender identity, and sexual preference are dependent on one another. Like 10 years ago, that was not a controversial statement, but now if you make the statement that runs contrary to the idea that biological sex, gender identity, and sexual preference, or even gender expression, you know, that actually got protected under law in Canada. Now the social constructionist viewpoint within the law is that they vary independently, and they don't. That's just biologically.
But I go back to where we evolutionize. In social, even like we learn things like there's ways that we treated human beings, different classifications, like even 100 years ago, that's just like blatantly wrong. It's not humane. And so I stand by that. If someone push the new philosophy, and my brain is starting to hurt. I've got to, that's why I do like a hard.
Okay, well, what I was going to say is I'm not advocating for mistreating anybody. I'm not advocating for that at all.
No, and I didn't take that way.
I'm just saying that, you know, when you state something as a biological truth and a scientific truth, and that is that these things are dependent on one another heavily, that's now the equivalent of hate speech, essentially. And I think that's a problem because, you know, how else are we going to solve these problems if we can't talk about them, right? And that's
I agree with you.
And that's why I'm like, you know, this is why I take the stance I do. But that goes back to why I tend to take a quiet, stand back approach in some of these classes, because I know that if I were to voice my opinions, no matter how well I try to articulate my argument, I'm surprised by just uttering the name Jordan Peterson. I haven't had somebody screech at me yet. I'm not kidding. My wife, Christina, has actually sat there and giggled when, like, I forget what class it was. We were asked about our influences, and I said, you know, Jordan. I put Jordan Peterson as, you know, the top of the psychological influences I have. There's Jordan Peterson, there's Carl Jung, there's Viktor Frankl, you know, all the way down to you know, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, all the authors and philosophers. And I'm surprised that hasn't caused problems.
I don't see why it would, because I think everyone's, well, a lot of times, especially in this field, people are respectful of like different philosophies and different belief systems. But this is why I got, my brain is really hurting. And I get up at 4 in the morning and I'm usually in bed by now. So that's
Yeah.
why I've
So yeah,
got
I
it.
apologize, but thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I would love to continue talking, and maybe we can try to schedule something earlier later on when we're not
It's
like
for me, yeah, because I get up at 4 and that whole thing, I have to get like 6 to 8 hours of sleep and I haven't been. And so I'm usually like hard stopping my brain. And that's what keeps me on my balance by like 8 o'clock my time.
okay.
So I'm
So
very engaged, but I just gotta like I'm like now I'm like even losing my
I apologize for that.
don't apologize because I love going with the spirit too. And that's why I think we're comfortable enough to say, I'm like, no, Sean, okay, we're done. You know what I mean? I don't feel I have to put any pretenses out there. And I'm just as like, this is the kind of conversation I like to engage in. I just have to remember that like my brain's like, okay, no, we're done now, we're good. So please don't ever apologize. Don't do that. You're good.
Okay. But again, thank you for doing this, and I'd love to continue this conversation on.
Heck yeah. And like, let me know. I don't prepare anything. I'm not scripted. I just go
I
with
don't like
whatever
to do
feel.
that either. I like the organic conversation. It's more. I feel like that's what allows that's what allows the jumping off points to go into deeper conversation.
I agree, and that's why I think that's another element that we're so different in so many things, but we're complementary in the things that help build our relationship rapport. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So tell Christine I said hi. I've never met her, but
I will.
Hi.
I will definitely
and
do.
Have a great night until next time.
Until next time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.